The sound of gunfire shattered the desert silence, just as the black stallion appeared on the ridge against the crimson sunrise. The echo reverberated across the valley, scattering a flock of ravens that had been circling overhead, their black wings cutting dark silhouettes against the awakening sky. It was the kind of morning that usually promised nothing but tranquility, the air still cool from the night, the scent of sage hanging in the atmosphere, the distant mountains, shrouded in that peculiar blue haze that makes the Nevada landscape so hauntingly beautiful. I instinctively dropped to the ground behind my photography blind, my heart hammering against my ribs as I clutched my camera. The rough desert earth pressed against my cheek, tiny pebbles digging into my skin. For 3 weeks I had stationed myself in this same spot, rising before dawn, waiting patiently for the perfect shot of the wild mustangs that occasionally descended from the eastern hills. Never once had I imagined becoming witness to history instead. Through my viewfinder, I witnessed a scene so extraordinary that for years afterward, people would question whether my photographs had been manipulated. They hadn't been. Some moments in history defy belief precisely because they are true. The desert has a way of conjuring such moments, dreamlike intersections of reality that feel prophetic, as if the vast emptiness itself occasionally decides to reveal something profound about the nature of existence. The presidential motorcade had come to an abrupt halt on Route 51, the vehicles forming a protective barrier around the armored limousine at the center. The black cars looked alien against the natural landscape, mechanical intruders in a realm that had remained largely unchanged for millennia. Secret Service agents swarmed across the asphalt, their dark suits absorbing the early morning sunlight, weapons drawn, scanning the golden Nevada hills for threats. Their movements were precise, rehearsed, the choreography of trained protectors faced with an unpredictable situation. In the confusion, somehow Donald Trump had emerged from his vehicle and stood just yards from the magnificent Mustang now frozen in place on the highway. Midnight, instantly recognizable by the white star marking on his forehead that blazed like a beacon against his obsidian coat. Everyone in our small Nevada town knew about Midnight. His story had been featured in the local paper multiple times, his image appearing on community bulletin boards and in school projects. The wild Mustang had formed an inexplicable bond with 12-year-old Sarah Connors, who was fighting a losing battle with an aggressive form of leukemia. Their connection had become something of a local legend, the untamable spirit of the desert, somehow tamed by a child whose own spirit refused to surrender to illness. Sarah's parents had attempted to adopt him after a Bureau of Land Management roundup, but Midnight had escaped back to the wild, yet mysteriously appeared near the family's property every few days, allowing only Sarah to approach him. It was the kind of story people need to believe in, evidence that something mysterious and meaningful exists beneath the surface of our rational world. As a wildlife photographer specializing in Nevada's threatened Mustang herds, I had been tracking Midnight for months, documenting his rare appearances when he would descend from the eastern hills to drink at the creek running parallel to the highway. My work had appeared in National Geographic and numerous conservation publications, but none of those carefully composed images would compare to what I was about to capture. My finger pressed the shutter release in rapid succession, the camera's motor drive whirring as it recorded frame after frame of a sequence that would later be studied by millions. The morning light was perfect, that golden hour illumination photographers dream about, revealing every detail with crystalline clarity. The stallion charged directly toward Donald Trump. His hooves thundered against the asphalt, mane flowing like liquid darkness, muscles rippling beneath his gleaming coat. A Secret Service agent fired another shot, the sound cracking across the landscape, and Trump, defying both protocol and self-preservation, stepped forward with his hand extended toward the approaching animal. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Donald Trump's security detail seemed frozen in disbelief, their training momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer unexpectedness of their protectee's action. What happened next wasn't just a collision of bodies, but a collision of symbols. A wild creature, representing America's vanishing frontier, and a man representing America's highest office meeting in a moment that transcended politics. My camera captured the precise instant when midnight's hoof struck the president's shoulder, sending him sprawling into the desert dust as another shot rang out across the landscape. The president's normally immaculate suit was suddenly covered in the same dust that coated the boots of ranchers and the hooves of wild horses, an unexpected equalizer in this surreal encounter. The magnificent black stallion collapsed onto the asphalt, blood spreading across his obsidian coat like dark tributaries, forming a river of life flowing away. The rising sun caught the crimson pool, transforming it momentarily into what looked like molten copper. Secret Service agents swarmed around the president, their faces masks of controlled panic, while others maintained their defensive posture, scanning the surroundings for additional threats. The motorcade vehicles revved their engines, ready for immediate evacuation. My final photograph from that sequence would become iconic. A fallen president, reaching toward a fallen Mustang, their forms mirroring each other against the desert floor. Twin expressions of surprise frozen in time. The image captured something primal and unexpected, a moment of genuine connection between two alpha males from entirely different worlds. But what my camera couldn't record was the president's barely audible command to his security detail as they rushed to his side, an order to save the horse at all costs. I heard it clearly across the still morning air, the words carrying with unusual force, brooking no argument even from men trained to prioritize his safety above all else. Those words, spoken in a moment of chaos, would alter the course of multiple lives, reshape a presidency, and expose secrets about both the man and the Mustang that powerful interests had worked to keep buried beneath the Nevada sand. The morning that had begun as a routine wildlife photography session had transformed into something that would soon captivate the nation and rewrite multiple destinies, including my own. Neither the Secret Service, nor our small community, nor even the president himself, yet understood that midnight carried something far more significant than his symbolic connection to a dying girl. Something valuable enough that certain people had already decided both the horse and the president would be better off dead. I couldn't have known it then, as I gathered my equipment with shaking hands and prepared to follow the hastily assembled emergency response. But I had just witnessed the opening act of a drama that would eventually expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of power in America. The desert wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the landscape, erasing tracks and obscuring evidence. Nature itself seemed determined to maintain its secrets, even as human events began to spiral in directions no one could have predicted. I secured my memory cards in a waterproof case and slipped it into my inside pocket, suddenly aware that I might be carrying the most valuable photographic evidence since the Zapruder film. The weight of that responsibility settled over me as I hurried toward my truck, determined to follow wherever this extraordinary story might lead. The small community hospital had never seen security like this. Barricades established a perimeter extending 3 blocks in every direction, with armed personnel stationed at regular intervals. Helicopters circled overhead, their rhythmic thumping a constant reminder of the extraordinary situation unfolding in our usually quiet town. Local police looked bewildered as they worked alongside federal agents, their jurisdictional boundaries temporarily erased by circumstances none of them had been trained to handle. I arrived just as they were converting the inner courtyard into an impromptu equine surgical center, my press credentials barely getting me past the first checkpoint. I had to invoke the names of several national publications I occasionally contributed to, as well as showing them previews of the images I'd captured that morning. The latter proved more effective than any official documentation. The hospital itself was a modest 2-story building constructed in the 1980s, designed to serve the basic medical needs of our small rural community. Its beige exterior and functional architecture had never been intended to withstand the scrutiny now being directed at it by the global media, assembling beyond the barricades. Satellite trucks lined the streets, their transmission dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Reporters from every major network stood before cameras, speculating about events they had no access to, filling airtime with theories and conjecture, while the truth unfolded beyond their reach. Sarah Connors was somewhere inside these walls, for her weekly treatment, unaware that her beloved Midnight now lay fighting for his life less than 100 feet from her room. The 12-year-old had become something of a local celebrity over the past year, her battle with leukemia, followed by the community through fundraisers, prayer circles, and regular updates in the town newspaper. Her unlikely bond with the wild Mustang had added a mystical dimension to her story, giving people something to marvel at rather than simply pity. Now, by some cosmic coincidence or something more deliberate, the animal that had given her hope was being wheeled into the same facility where she fought her own daily battle for survival. The veterinary team from Cornell had arrived with unprecedented speed, their equipment transported on a military aircraft, diverted by presidential order. The best equine surgical specialists in the country had been assembled within hours of the incident, a feat of logistics that would normally have taken days or weeks to arrange. Through the windows I glimpsed their urgent work on the wounded Mustang, their expressions betraying both concentration and disbelief. Something about this horse had captured the attention of the most powerful man in the country, and now they were feeling the weight of that unexpected connection. Their surgical scrubs were already stained with blood, as they worked to extract bullet fragments and repair damaged tissue, their movements precise despite the unusual circumstances and improvised facilities. What I didn't yet know, what none of us knew, was that Midnight's blood work had already revealed something extraordinary. As standard protocol, samples had been taken immediately upon the animal's arrival, basic tests conducted to determine blood type and other factors relevant to emergency treatment. But a young lab technician with a special interest in equine medicine had noticed anomalies that defied explanation. The Mustang's genetic profile contained markers never before documented in equine science, unusual protein structures and cellular characteristics that sparked immediate interest. Further analysis would later link these anomalies to remarkable therapeutic properties that could revolutionize cancer treatment, particularly for conditions like Sarah's aggressive leukemia. The president had been briefed on this discovery in the makeshift medical center established in an adjacent room, where his own minor injuries were being treated. Despite the Secret Service's insistence on evacuation to a more secure facility, he had refused to leave until he received a comprehensive update on Midnight's condition. His subsequent actions, the calls to researchers, the emergency funding authorizations, the complete rearrangement of his schedule, would later seem prescient. But at that moment, watching through my camera lens as he conferred intently with medical personnel, all I saw was a powerful man, seemingly humbled by an encounter with one of nature's creations. His usual bombastic demeanor had been replaced by something more contemplative, more focused. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to anyone familiar with his typical public persona. Hospital staff moved with heightened awareness, the presence of the presidential detail creating an atmosphere of tense professionalism. Nurses who normally cared for the elderly or delivered the community's babies now found themselves navigating security protocols and fielding questions from intelligence officials. In the cafeteria, Secret Service agents ate alongside local doctors, their earpieces and vigilant eyes marking them as clearly as their dark suits. In this strange temporary community, information became the most valuable currency, whispered between shifts and pieced together like a complex puzzle. By nightfall, rumors spread through our town like wildfire across the desert. Some claimed the president had experienced some kind of epiphany in the moment of collision, a spiritual awakening that had fundamentally altered his worldview. Others suggested more pragmatic political calculations, a recognition of the powerful optics created by the incident, an opportunity to reshape his image through association with both an innocent child and a symbol of American heritage. The most cynical speculated that the entire event had been staged, a desperate publicity stunt designed to humanize a controversial figure. None suspected the truth that I would gradually piece together over the coming days, that the Mustang's appearance on that road had not been coincidence, and the shots fired were not solely from Secret Service weapons. Through careful examination of my photographs, enhanced and enlarged to reveal details invisible to the naked eye, I began to notice discrepancies. The trajectory of the bullet that struck Midnight could not have come from the positions occupied by the president's protective detail. There was evidence of a vehicle hastily departing the scene from the eastern hillside, tracks partially visible in several frames captured during the initial confusion. Most tellingly, in the background of one image, I could make out a figure watching from the ridge, someone who had no reason to be in that isolated location at that precise moment. Midnight had been deliberately driven toward the motorcade by someone who knew exactly when the president would be passing along that isolated stretch of highway. Someone who had also known about the unique properties in the Mustang's blood and had decided that this knowledge should never reach the broader scientific community. Someone who had failed in their mission because they hadn't anticipated one variable: the inexplicable connection that formed instantly between a wild creature and a man known more for his urban towers than for any affinity with nature. The assassination attempt, for that's what it had been though, targeting the horse rather than the man, had backfired spectacularly, bringing the very attention to Midnight that certain interests had desperately wanted to avoid. As I worked through the night in my small dark room, developing the physical photographs that would serve as insurance against any attempt to confiscate or alter my digital files, I felt the weight of unwanted knowledge settling over me. I was no longer merely documenting an unusual event. I had become entangled in something dangerous. The question now was whether to retreat into the safety of silence or to follow the story wherever it might lead and whatever risks it might entail. The faces of Sarah and Midnight, both fighting for their lives in the hospital across town, made the decision inevitable. Some truths demand to be told, regardless of consequence. For 7 days, the president remained in our small town, his presence transforming our community into the unexpected center of world attention. The sleepy desert municipality of barely 15,000 souls suddenly found itself hosting the White House press corps, international media, curious tourists, and a steadily growing crowd of protesters and supporters who established opposing camps on the town's main street. Local businesses struggled to accommodate the influx, restaurants operating around the clock, the single hotel booked to capacity with overflow visitors sleeping in their cars or camping in designated areas hastily established by the overwhelmed town council. The official explanation for the president's extended stay cited security concerns and minor injuries from his fall, but anyone watching closely could see something more profound unfolding. Each morning he visited the hospital courtyard where Midnight was recovering, spending hours beside the Mustang's makeshift stall, sometimes reading documents, sometimes simply sitting in contemplative silence. Secret Service agents maintained a discreet perimeter during these visits, having learned that their protectee would not be dissuaded from this daily ritual. The horse's condition improved steadily under the care of the country's foremost veterinary experts, the bullet wound healing cleanly, though nerve damage left his right foreleg weakened. More remarkable was the behavior of the notoriously wild animal. He showed none of the anxiety or aggression typically expected from a Mustang in captivity, especially one recovering from trauma. Instead, he seemed almost to welcome the president's presence, often nickering softly when the man entered the courtyard. In the afternoons, the president visited Sarah's room, the Secret Service, creating an unprecedented security perimeter around a 13-year-old cancer patient. No media was allowed inside, no statements were issued about these meetings, but hospital staff spoke in hushed tones about the changes they were witnessing in both the president and the child. The usually frail girl appeared increasingly animated during and after these visits, her medical readings showing subtle but meaningful improvements that defied explanation. The president, meanwhile, emerged from these sessions visibly affected, his typical brashness subdued, his interactions with staff more personable and attentive. Whatever transpired in that sterile hospital room was catalyzing a transformation that even political opponents found difficult to dismiss as merely strategic. I documented these developments from whatever vantage points I could secure. My photographic essay, taking shape as a record of an unprecedented moment in American history, having gained a reputation as the primary visual chronicler of the unfolding events. I was granted access to areas barred to other media, though still kept at a respectful distance from the principal figures in this extraordinary drama. Through long lenses and carefully negotiated positions, I captured images that would later be described as revealing the president America had never seen before. Unguarded moments of genuine connection with both the injured Mustang and the ailing child. On the third day, blood was drawn from midnight and rushed to the hospital's laboratory, now supplemented with equipment and personnel from major research institutions flown in at presidential request. The Mustang's genetic anomalies, first noticed by the observant lab technician, became the focus of intensive analysis. Teams of scientists worked around the clock, their excitement palpable as they recognized the potential implications of their findings. Preliminary results suggested the presence of unique protein structures with remarkable properties, the ability to identify and selectively target cancer cells while simultaneously stimulating immune response and cellular regeneration. Nature, it seemed, had evolved in this isolated desert Mustang population what medical science had been pursuing for decades. On the fourth day, after a flurry of calls with medical specialists and FDA officials that included emergency authorization protocols typically reserved for pandemic responses, Sarah began receiving an experimental treatment derived from the Mustang's remarkable genetic profile. The physicians responsible exhibited a mixture of professional caution and barely suppressed hope as they initiated the treatment, aware they were venturing into uncharted medical territory driven by extraordinary circumstances and political will that had temporarily removed bureaucratic obstacles. The president himself signed the authorization documents, assuming personal responsibility for a medical intervention that under normal circumstances would have required years of testing before human application. On the fifth day, her doctors reported the first measurable improvement in her condition since her diagnosis 18 months earlier. Blood tests revealed a significant reduction in cancer markers, her vital signs strengthened, and most remarkably, her chronic pain diminished to the point where her medication was reduced for the first time in months. News of this development remained closely guarded, restricted to a small circle of medical professionals and officials, but those aware of it recognized the potential historic significance. If these results proved sustainable and replicable, what had begun as a bizarre collision on a desert highway might ultimately revolutionize cancer treatment worldwide. Meanwhile, my investigation into the suspicious circumstances surrounding the incident continued discreetly. Using contacts in local law enforcement and consulting with a former forensic analyst I knew from previous documentary work, I assembled mounting evidence that the events on Route 51 had been orchestrated. Satellite imagery obtained through a contact at a weather service revealed a vehicle positioned on the eastern ridge in the pre-dawn hours before the president's motorcade was scheduled to pass. Analysis of bullet fragments recovered from the scene indicated two different weapons had been fired: the standard-issue firearms carried by Secret Service and a high-powered hunting rifle. Most damning was the discovery that the road itself had been changed just 12 hours before the president's journey, information that would have been available only to those with access to highly classified security protocols. The pattern suggested involvement at the highest levels, though the motive remained elusive until I connected with a research scientist specializing in equine genetics at UC Davis. Speaking under condition of anonymity, she revealed that rumors had circulated for years about a population of Mustangs in the Nevada desert, with unusual genetic characteristics. Several pharmaceutical companies had been quietly acquiring wild horses from the region under various pretexts, particularly following Bureau of Land Management roundups. The implications were staggering. If Midnight's therapeutic potential could be patented and controlled, the profit implications would run into billions of dollars. His public exposure and the subsequent government interest represented a catastrophic loss of potential revenue and proprietary research advantage. I documented these developments from whatever vantage points I could secure, my photographic essay taking shape as a record of an unprecedented moment in American history. But the most significant images in my collection weren't of medical procedures or security details, they were of the gradual transformation visible in the president's face and bearing. Through my lens, I chronicled a metamorphosis that transcended politics, capturing a powerful man reconsidering fundamental aspects of himself through an unexpected connection with both wildness and vulnerability. The man who arrived in our town had worn his power like armor, his expressions calibrated for maximum political effect even in moments of crisis. His face had been a mask familiar to millions, features arranged in patterns of practiced confidence or calculated outrage, as circumstances demanded. The man I photographed on the 7th day, sitting alone beside Midnight's stall in the early morning light, showed something entirely different. There was a vulnerability there, a thoughtfulness, that seemed to have emerged from some internal revolution. The habitual tension had eased from his jaw, the defensive posture had softened, and most tellingly, his eyes engaged directly with whatever held his attention rather than constantly scanning for audience reaction. Whatever had passed between him and the Mustang in that initial moment of collision had expanded during their shared convalescence into something that defied political analysis. Perhaps most remarkable was his interaction with the hospital staff, the nurses, orderlies, and administrative personnel who maintained the facility's daily operations despite the extraordinary circumstances. Where he had previously moved through such spaces with an entourage, creating distance between himself and ordinary citizens, he now engaged directly, learning names, asking questions, expressing genuine gratitude for their efforts. These weren't staged photo opportunities. Indeed, many occurred beyond media access, but genuine moments of connection that left lasting impressions on those who experienced them. A night shift nurse described to me how he had appeared in the staff break room at 2 a.m., making coffee for the exhausted team, and listening to their stories until dawn, his security detail waiting patiently in the hallway. On the morning of the 8th day, without any formal announcement, the president's team began preparations for departure. The demands of office could be deferred no longer. National and international issues requiring his physical presence in Washington. But before leaving, he made 3 consequential decisions that would reverberate far beyond our small community, establishing trajectories that would influence policy, science, and his own legacy in ways no one could have anticipated when his motorcade first entered our jurisdiction. First, he established the Midnight Initiative, a federally funded research program, combining cutting-edge cancer treatment protocols with conservation efforts for America's wild Mustang population. With an initial allocation of $2 billion and unprecedented structural flexibility, the program would bring together medical researchers, conservation biologists, and indigenous knowledge keepers to explore the therapeutic potential of the Mustangs while ensuring their protection and genetic diversity. The directive explicitly prohibited any private patenting of discoveries emerging from this research, declaring all findings part of the common heritage of humanity and establishing a foundation for providing resulting treatments at minimal cost worldwide. Second, he arranged for Sarah's transfer to a leading medical facility where she would become the first official recipient of the treatment developed from Midnight's genetic material, with all expenses covered by a special presidential fund. Her family, initially overwhelmed by the attention and implications, found themselves embraced by a community of support extending far beyond our small town. The president's personal guarantee that their daughter would receive every possible advantage in her battle against leukemia came with no requests for publicity or political acknowledgement. A private commitment made without cameras present, though inevitably becoming public knowledge through the scale of the arrangements involved. Third, he purchased 50,000 acres of threatened Mustang habitat surrounding our town, declaring it protected federal land in perpetuity. This action, accomplished through emergency executive powers rarely employed for conservation purposes, effectively created a sanctuary encompassing the territory where Midnight and his herd had roamed freely for generations. Local ranchers, initially concerned about grazing rights, were incorporated into the management planning with generous compensation and ongoing roles in maintaining the integrity of the landscape they had worked for generations. The directive specifically prohibited future mineral exploration, development, or resource extraction, a declaration that would later prove significant when substantial lithium deposits were discovered beneath the protected terrain. Critics immediately framed these actions as a calculated political move designed to soften his image ahead of the upcoming election. Media pundits dissected the strategic implications, consultants debated the demographic impact, and opponents searched for vulnerabilities in the structure of the initiatives. They couldn't see what I had witnessed through my lens over those transformative 8 days, the genuine awakening that had occurred when an untamable spirit from America's wild places had literally collided with the embodiment of American power. Politics would inevitably reassert itself around these events, but at their core lay something authentic that even the most cynical analysis couldn't entirely dismiss. As the presidential motorcade prepared to depart, I secured one final photograph that would ultimately become the signature image of my essay. The president stood in the hospital courtyard beside Midnight, who had been brought outside for the first time since his surgery. Sarah, still weak but showing visible improvement, sat in a wheelchair beside them. None of them were looking at the camera or playing to an audience. Instead, they gazed together toward the eastern hills where the Mustang's herd still roamed free, their expressions sharing something that transcended their profound differences. A recognition of something essential about life itself, something about freedom and connection and the delicate threads that bind us to each other, and to the natural world we so often overlook. 3 months later, my photographic essay documenting the entire episode was published to international acclaim. Major publications competed for exclusive rights to different segments of the collection. Museums requested exhibitions, and academic institutions incorporated the images into curricula, ranging from political science to visual arts. The photographs told a story words alone could not convey. The president's evolution from the shocked figure sprawled in the dust to the contemplative man who had emerged from his encounter with something essential he had previously overlooked. The sequence capturing the initial collision became particularly iconic, reproduced globally as a symbol of unexpected transformation through unlikely connection. The publication coincided with the first peer-reviewed medical papers emerging from the Midnight Initiative, presenting preliminary findings on the therapeutic properties discovered in the Mustang's genetic profile. The scientific community responded with a mixture of excitement and skepticism, the extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence that researchers were methodically assembling. Early clinical trials on patients with conditions similar to Sarah's showed promising results, though experts cautioned that larger studies would be necessary before definitive conclusions could be drawn. What couldn't be disputed were the before and after medical records of the initial subjects, which documented improvements that existing treatments had failed to achieve. Sarah's recovery continued to defy medical expectations. The treatment protocol derived from Midnight's genetic anomalies showed significant efficacy against her aggressive leukemia, reducing cancer markers to nearly undetectable levels within 12 weeks. Her physicians, initially cautious in their prognosis, began using terms like remission and eventually potential cure in their evaluations. The child who had been given months to live when the president's motorcade first entered our town was now returning to school, participating in community activities, and becoming an eloquent advocate for both cancer research and wild horse conservation. Her story became emblematic of possibilities previously unimagined in medical science, though experts emphasized that her case might represent optimal circumstances that couldn't be universally expected. Midnight himself healed more completely than the veterinary experts had predicted, though he would always carry a slight limp, a physical reminder of the collision that had altered so many trajectories. After extensive debate about his future, decision-makers ultimately deferred to Sarah's wishes, releasing the Mustang back to his native habitat once his recovery was complete. The reunion between the stallion and his herd was documented by a small team of wildlife biologists and conservationists, who reported behavior suggesting the social bonds had remained intact despite his absence. Most remarkably, he continued to make periodic appearances near the sanctuary headquarters where Sarah often visited, maintaining the connection that had initiated this extraordinary chain of events. The president returned to Washington and the demands of office. But something fundamental had shifted. Those close to him noticed subtle yet significant changes in his approach to certain issues. His notorious impatience with scientific briefings evolved into more engaged attention, particularly regarding environmental and medical matters. His public statements, while maintaining their characteristic directness, incorporated nuances previously absent from his communication style. Policy positions that had seemed immutable for years demonstrated unexpected flexibility, particularly regarding healthcare accessibility and conservation priorities. The Midnight Initiative received bipartisan support, passing through Congress with remarkable speed, despite the typically polarized political environment. Environmental protection policies, particularly those concerning public lands where wild mustangs roamed, received unexpected presidential attention and resource allocation. Critics claimed these changes represented mere strategic positioning ahead of the election, a calculated attempt to broaden appeal beyond his traditional base. Perhaps there was some truth in that assessment. Politics rarely yields completely to transformation, but having witnessed the events unfold through my camera lens, I recognize something more profound: the power of unexpected connection to penetrate the barriers we construct around ourselves. Whether those barriers are political, ideological, or personal, the president had encountered something in that collision that challenged his fundamental understanding of himself and his relationship to the world, an encounter that continued to reverberate through his decisions and priorities. My own professional trajectory underwent similar transformation. From a respected but relatively obscure wildlife photographer, I found myself elevated to unexpected prominence. My work discussed in contexts ranging from photojournalism seminars to political analysis. Exhibition invitations arrived from institutions worldwide, book deals were offered, and documentary filmmakers sought collaboration rights. More significantly, the events I had documented opened doors to investigate the broader circumstances surrounding the incident, particularly the evidence suggesting deliberate orchestration rather than coincidence. Working with selected journalists from established publications, I gradually assembled a comprehensive investigation into what had actually occurred en route 5-1 that morning. Financial records revealed substantial investments by certain pharmaceutical corporations in wild horse acquisition programs throughout the Nevada region. Internal communications obtained through whistleblowers documented awareness of the therapeutic potential in specific Mustang bloodlines years before the public incident. Most damning were connections established between these corporate interests and certain officials who had been involved in the president's travel arrangements during the period when the motorcade route was unexpectedly altered. The resulting exposé, published 18 months after the initial events, triggered congressional investigations, regulatory reform, and multiple criminal indictments. Corporate executives who had authorized the attempt to eliminate Midnight before his therapeutic potential could become public knowledge faced charges ranging from conspiracy to attempted murder. Government officials who had compromised presidential security protocols in exchange for financial consideration encountered consequences that transcended political affiliation, their betrayal of public trust deemed unforgivable across partisan divide. The broader implications regarding corporate influence in pharmaceutical research and wildlife management led to structural reforms that would ultimately reshape entire industries. Sarah's family established a foundation, bringing children with serious illnesses to experience the healing presence of wild horses. The program combined conventional medical support with the emerging therapeutic protocols developed through the Midnight Initiative and opportunities for direct interaction with mustangs. In protected settings, preliminary research suggested measurable improvements in both physical and psychological outcomes for participants, though the program's designers emphasized the holistic benefits beyond quantifiable metrics. Children who had known only hospital rooms and clinical procedures found themselves connecting with creatures that embodied freedom and resilience, experiencing something beyond their illness that expanded their conception of themselves and their possibilities. Midnight became something of a celebrity, his story inspiring conservationists and medical researchers alike to see connections between previously separate fields of study. Wildlife biologists documented his continued leadership of his herd, noting behavioral adaptations that suggested his experience in captivity had not diminished his essential nature, but perhaps enhanced his adaptability and problem-solving capabilities. His distinctive profile, instantly recognizable by the white star marking, appeared on educational materials, conservation fundraising campaigns, and even medical research publications, bridging disciplines that had rarely found common ground before these extraordinary events. As for the president, he never publicly discussed the personal dimensions of his experience. He referenced the Midnight Initiative in speeches and acknowledged its successes, as politicians do. He incorporated the themes of unexpected connection and transformative encounter into his rhetorical repertoire, though always framed in broader contexts rather than personal narrative. His official statements regarding the conspiracy revelations focused on justice and accountability rather than any sense of personal betrayal or endangerment. In public, he maintained the careful balance between authenticity and strategic messaging that high office demands, revealing only what served the complex calculations of leadership and legacy. But twice yearly, without announcement or entourage, his private plane would land at our small regional airport. A single unmarked vehicle, not a motorcade, would make its way to the newly established Mustang sanctuary, where Sarah, now in remission, and Midnight, now leading a small band of rehabilitated Mustangs, would receive their powerful visitor. These visits followed no official schedule, appeared on no public calendar, and generated no press releases or social media content. They represented something beyond politics, beyond image management, beyond the public persona that necessarily dominates a leader's existence. They honored a connection that had transformed multiple lives through the unlikeliest of circumstances. On these occasions I kept my distance, my camera deliberately unused. Some transformations belong only to those who experience them, even when they involve the most photographed man in the world. From discreet vantage points, I sometimes glimpsed their interactions, the president sitting quietly on a weathered bench while Sarah explained her latest conservation project, or walking slowly alongside Midnight across the landscape where the Mustang had nearly lost his life and paradoxically found his greatest purpose. In these unguarded moments, outside the performance demands of public life, I recognized a quality rarely associated with powerful figures: contentment, perhaps even a species of peace. The cynical continued to dismiss this story as sentimentality or political manipulation. Pundits dissect it for strategic implications. Historians debate its significance for the presidency as an institution, and ordinary citizens interpret it through filters of their existing political allegiances. I can only report what I witnessed: a collision on a desert highway that somehow connected three broken spirits: a wild Mustang with a legacy of freedom, a child fighting for her future, and a powerful man isolated by his very position of authority. Three lives that might never have intersected except for circumstances that some would call coincidence, and others might name as something more meaningful. What began as a single moment captured by my camera continues to expand outward in widening circles of influence, touching lives far beyond a dusty road in the Nevada desert, where a wild Mustang once stepped into the path of history. The Midnight Initiative has now supported research, resulting in treatments for dozens of previously intractable conditions. The conservation programs established in its wake have protected over 3 million acres of critical habitat and reversed population declines in multiple threatened species. Sarah's foundation has brought its healing program to thousands of children battling serious illness, while the legislative reforms sparked by the conspiracy investigation have fundamentally altered the relationship between corporate interests and public resources. Sometimes, when I return to that stretch of highway in the early morning light, I can almost see the events unfolding again: the presidential motorcade appearing from the southern horizon, the magnificent black stallion descending from the eastern hills, the collision that should have ended in tragedy, but somehow catalyzed transformation instead. In those moments I understand something essential about the nature of significant change. It rarely arrives through anticipated channels or according to strategic plan. More often, it emerges from unexpected intersections, from collisions between worlds that normally remain separate, from connections we neither seek nor initially welcome, but that ultimately reveal something essential we had previously failed to recognize. 5 years after the events that transformed our small Nevada town into an unexpected nexus of history, I received an anonymous package containing a single thumb drive and a handwritten note with coordinates for a location deep in the desert wilderness. The timing seemed significant. Exactly 5 years to the day since the president's motorcade had encountered midnight en route. As a journalist who had maintained connections with key figures in the aftermath, I had developed a reputation for discretion and accuracy that made me a logical recipient for sensitive information. Still, the mysterious delivery triggered both professional curiosity and personal caution, particularly given the powerful interests that had been exposed through my previous reporting on the incident. After taking appropriate security precautions, having the drive examined for malware and consulting with trusted contacts in digital security, I accessed the contents in a secure offline environment. What I discovered sent shockwaves through my understanding of everything we thought we knew about the events en route 5. The drive contained classified documents, private communications, and most startlingly, genetic research data that predated the collision by more than a decade. As I combed through the materials over several sleepless nights, a far more complex narrative emerged. One that would fundamentally rewrite the story I had documented and the nation had embraced. Midnight wasn't just a random wild Mustang with fortunate genetic anomalies. He was the product of a classified government program initiated during the Cold War. A living bioweapon designed to carry modified genetic material that could be selectively activated under specific conditions. The program, codenamed Pegasus, had officially been discontinued in the late 1980s, but apparently continued under deep black budget operations, unknown even to most intelligence oversight committees. Its original purpose, to develop horses that could survive in contaminated battlefields while carrying medical countermeasures, had evolved into something far more ambitious, creating living repositories of advanced genetic therapies that could remain hidden in plain sight within wild herds. Most shocking was the revelation about Sarah Connors. Her leukemia had not been a tragic coincidence, but a deliberately induced condition created by covert exposure to specific compounds designed to manifest as naturally occurring cancer. She had been selected as a test subject because her genetic profile made her an ideal candidate for the treatments Midnight carried in his DNA. Their miraculous bond had been engineered through chemical markers that created mutual biochemical recognition, pheromones, and neural signals that drew them together despite the Mustang's otherwise wild nature. The president's involvement added the final, most stunning layer to this conspiracy. The documents indicated that he had been briefed on Pegasus shortly after taking office, part of the classified intelligence portfolio provided to each new chief executive. What appeared to have been a random collision and spontaneous transformation was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated exposure designed to bring the program into protected status before rival foreign intelligence services could acquire the technology. The entire incident, from the rerouted motorcade to the president's seemingly impulsive decision to approach the horse, had been meticulously planned. Yet within this manufactured narrative lay a genuine transformation. The documents included psychological evaluations of the president before and after the incident, revealing that while the encounter had been staged, its emotional and psychological impact had been unexpectedly authentic. The connection formed with both Midnight and Sarah had catalyzed genuine changes in his worldview and priorities. What began as strategic theater evolved into something its architects hadn't anticipated, actual human connection that transcended political calculation. I sat with this knowledge for days, unsure how to proceed. The story I had told, that millions had embraced as a rare moment of authentic humanity breaking through political artifice, was fundamentally a fabrication. Yet the positive outcomes were undeniable. Treatments developed through the Midnight Initiative had saved thousands of lives. Conservation efforts had protected critical ecosystems, and even the political landscape had shifted toward greater cooperation on issues that transcended partisan division. The coordinates from the anonymous note led me to a remote desert location, where to my astonishment, I found Sarah Connors, now an 18-year-old young woman in complete remission, waiting alongside a weathered military officer I recognized from presidential security briefings. They had different reasons for wanting the truth revealed, but shared a conviction that the complete story should finally be told. "They used me," Sarah acknowledged, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. They made me sick so they could make me well. But what they didn't count on was that I'd discover the truth, or that I'd find others like me. The officer, identifying himself only as the former director of the Pegasus program, explained that his conscience had finally overcome decades of conditioned secrecy. We created something powerful enough to heal or harm entire population. That kind of power can't belong to any government or corporation. The people deserve to know. Sarah revealed that she had assembled a network of other unwitting test subjects, all with similar stories of mysterious illnesses and miraculous recoveries connected to encounters with wild animals. Together, they had pieced together the broader scope of the program. Not just horses, but wolves, eagles, and other iconic American wildlife had been similarly modified, carrying different genetic therapies for various conditions. The government had essentially created a living pharmacy dispersed across the nation's wild spaces, hidden from public knowledge, but accessible to those with the proper clearance and need. Most remarkably, Sarah explained that despite knowing she had been used as an experimental subject, she couldn't regret the outcome. They gave me cancer, but they also gave me life. And not just physical survival. They gave me purpose. She had established a foundation that helped other survivors navigate the ethical and emotional complexities of their situations, while advocating for transparency and oversight of classified research programs. The president, according to both Sarah and the officer, had genuinely not known the full scope of the program when he took office. The transformation I had documented was partly his reaction to discovering the ethical violations committed under government authority. His subsequent policy changes and the establishment of the Midnight Initiative represented an attempt to redirect the program's research toward public benefit, while gradually bringing its existence into the light through controlled disclosure. I left the desert meeting with another thumb drive, this one containing testimonies from dozens of program participants, scientists and officials, all willing to go on record now that the initial breach had occurred. The material represented the most significant government whistleblowing since Snowden, with profound implications for medical ethics, military research oversight, and public trust in institutions. Before publishing, I contacted the White House for comment. To my surprise, I received a personal call from the president, who acknowledged the broad outlines of my findings while disputing certain specific details. What followed was a 3-hour conversation that challenged my understanding of leadership, compromise, and the complex moral calculations required when navigating between transparency and security. There are some secrets, he told me, that can't be revealed all at once without causing more harm than good. What looks like deception is sometimes a matter of timing, bringing people to understanding, gradually, rather than drowning them in truths they aren't prepared to process. He requested 3 months before I published. Time to prepare proper congressional briefings, secure relevant research facilities, and ensure that ongoing treatments wouldn't be disrupted by public reaction. Against my journalistic instincts, but honoring the complexity of the situation, I agreed. When my comprehensive report was finally published, the initial public reaction was exactly what might be expected. Shock, outrage, conspiracy theories, and demands for accountability. Congressional hearings were convened, resignations tendered, and reforms initiated. The medical establishment struggled to reconcile ethical violations with undeniable therapeutic breakthroughs. Conservation organizations grappled with the implications of genetically modified wildlife within supposedly pristine ecosystems. Amid the tumult, something unexpected emerged. A national conversation about the intersection of technology, nature, ethics, and governance that transcended traditional political divisions. The story became a catalyst for reconsidering fundamental questions about humanity's relationship with both the natural world and our own advancing capabilities to reshape it. Midnight, meanwhile, continued to roam the protected sanctuary with his herd, carrying in his DNA both the legacy of government manipulation and the potential for healing that had already transformed thousands of lives. Sarah continued her advocacy work, her personal experience bridging the gap between victims seeking justice and researchers pursuing legitimate medical advances. The president, having navigated the most significant disclosure crisis since the Pentagon Papers, found his legacy defined not by the initial deception, but by his administration's subsequent commitment to transparency and reform. As for me, I returned to the ridge overlooking Route 51 on the anniversary of the collision. Each year, watching the sunrise illuminate the landscape where an engineered encounter had nevertheless produced authentic transformation. The staged collision had revealed something genuine about our capacity for connection across seemingly insurmountable divides between human and animal, between political adversaries, between technological manipulation and natural wisdom. In documenting this complex intersection of deception and authenticity, I had discovered something essential about truth itself. Rarely pure, never simple, but always worth pursuing, even when the journey reveals complexities we might prefer to ignore. The story of Midnight, Sarah, and the president represented not what we wished had happened, but what actually occurred in all its messy, contradictory reality. And in that mess lay a wisdom more valuable than any comforting but simplified narrative. Years later, when asked why I had risked my professional reputation by agreeing to delay publication despite possessing explosive evidence, I would offer the same explanation. Some stories aren't just about exposing facts, but about understanding their meaning. Not just what happened, but what it reveals about who we are and who we might become. The tale of a Mustang, a child, and a president had started as manufactured theater, but evolved into genuine human drama, with consequences none of its architects could have predicted. In that transformation from artifice to authenticity lay a truth worth embracing, regardless of its complicated origins. Just as Midnight carried healing potential hidden within his manipulated genes, sometimes the most valuable truths emerge from circumstances initially designed to deceive. The collision on Route 51 may have been staged, but the connections it formed and the changes it catalyzed were as real as the desert landscape where it all began. If you like this story, please like and subscribe for more videos like this and discover the power of nature and humanity. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, where we will go into a bizarre story that no one believes.